Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Todd. Welcome to another interesting conversation. I appreciate you joining me. So today I'm joined by Andy Carlson, who is a coach and facilitator with the Tim Fletcher organization. So Andy, welcome. I appreciate you joining me today. How are you doing?
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
When we chatted before we shot this episode, I got a chance to learn much more about your story, which I think is really quite fascinating. Can you just talk a little bit about how you ended up being a coach and facilitator with the Tim Fletcher organization, from where you came?
Mm-hmm. I became a coach and facilitator because I went through the program myself uh, after a really difficult marriage ended. And I'd been in what we would maybe call like treatment resistant depression for 7 or 8 years, which was really just, somebody who's enmeshed, extremely codependent, and in a relationship with somebody who gets triggered and yells for 4 hours every other day. And it was like a really difficult place. And, I actually, like, I always struggle to tell my story because, the immediate part of the story was the marriage and the difficulties in the marriage and how I showed it up in that and who I was in that. But like, in the healing journey, you look back to your childhood and there's a lot of juice there of, growing up in a family where I was also yelled at pretty much every day and hit a lot and ordered to behave and to conform. And so like the family dynamics of childhood were really difficult. And then there's a middle layer as well, between childhood and marriage of, where I was focusing on my career, but my career was a place where like I essentially treated my body like a machine and abused myself trying to run as hard as I could to get more money or power, just like on the achievement treadmill. And so, I mean, the marriage and the career kind of point to the childhood. The childhood is a lot of stories there. So let me know if there's an area that you want me to dive in deeper. I'm an open book, and like I'm willing to talk about like anything that I've been through and also like my part in it.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about your childhood. I know when we chatted before, you talked a lot about the strictness of it and the particularly kind of the verbal aggression that you experienced.
Mm,
So could you kind of walk through just a little bit of what some of that experience was like growing up that perhaps may have set up this kind of inner need to
mm-hmm.
kind of prove yourself and
Yeah, we interviewed a narcissism expert maybe a year ago, and I wish I could remember the exact phrase, but they were talking about like cults, but then how a narcissistic family is similar to being a cult of one family. And when I look back, that's essentially what my family was. It's hard to talk about it without like the religious angle. We were hyper religious, but we were the good religious, where you know 90 to 98% of people are going to hell, and you've got to be running like crazy to be perfect, to be the best that you can be. But you also hate, reject, discard anybody who is not in that 2%, that 5%. So there's this kind of very antisocial, anti-societal, like rejecting pretty much all of humanity. And I think that's the core of like what we grew up in, is like our human biology was rejected. So if I was sniffling, I was yelled at. If I was coughing too loud, I was yelled at. Our sexuality is something that's like dirty and sinful, and we're yelled at. And and so there are these like very religious, very mean kind of overtones to it, and a very just rejecting our body, rejecting aliveness, and rejecting others. And it was also something where there was a lot of like physical abuse as well. Um, I mentioned that my wife was triggered every other day. Like my father had a short ten. I'm mixing the word temper and tantrum there, and I don't like I don't know what word was about to come out of my mouth, but it was like he with his own complex trauma, something that's like unseen and unrecognized, like our childhood aliveness was something that triggered him. If we were playing outside, the noise of that is something that it would upset him, and then he'd start yelling at us, and then we'd be hit, and then we'd be sent to our rooms. And so it was like a place of just this constant punishment, and but also like this almost, he had this thing, like he never hit us with his fist. Like I remember him saying this to mom and saying this to us, is like, since he never hit, like bad people hit their kids with their fist, but he never hit us with his fist. It was always an open hand. And so that wasn't hitting. Like hitting with an open hand isn't hitting. So he never hit us. And if you ask anybody in my family today, they would probably deny that dad ever hit us, because like here's the rule that was created, and here he is living inside that rule. And like I was forced to finish food that was on we're members of the Clean Plate Club, so you've got to finish all the food on your plate. You can't deny any food that's on the table. You have to eat it. There's starving kids in Africa. Beggars can't be choosers. And so there's like all these different ways where I was forced to eat, when my human biology, when my intuition told me I'm full, or even I don't like this. Like having the choice to have a preference was taken away, but also like that connection to the gut, to the gut, even to say, hey, buddy, it's time to stop eating. And then there's like the flip side too. Food was used as a threat. If I don't obey, if I don't shut up, if I don't do this, I'm going to be sent away from the table. If if he's displeased with something, like I'm gonna have to miss supper. So there's this weird thing. Like I sometimes have a hard time. Like there are people who, I have clients who have lived as a child, lived in their car and would go days without eating, and so they have food scarcity, like obvious like food scarcity issues. And so it's weird for me, and it's like hard sometimes to see and to admit that I have that same food scarcity. Like there was food, like my family, well, we were good parents, we were a good family. There's food on the table for every meal, but like that food wasn't accessible for every meal. There was a threat around it for every meal. Um, and so even just like the way we sat around the table, like we had assigned seatings, and one of my dad's favorite TV shows was Father Knows Best. And so it's kind of, he's the hero, the role model, but like my assigned seat was next to him. And so it was a lot easier to get just cuffed on the back of the head if there was anything, maybe I chewed with my mouth open, maybe my fork clicked my teeth. Those were both also things that were, you're a pig, or you're dirty, you're gross, you're disgusting. The month before my birthday, like that was an opportunity for dad to threaten me with taking the birthday away. And so it's like there's this month where like I have to be rigid and tiny and small and just very
conforming,
conforming. And anything is an immediate threat of like that day, the celebration that's supposed to be a celebration for me would be taken away. And there's like, I had this weird thing. So my birthday's the middle of the summer. And I think for age 6 and 7 or 7 and 8, I had the flu on my birthday. And we understand that complex trauma is psychosomatic. I went my entire life thinking I had the flu on my birthday, but I didn't have the flu on my birthday. I had this thing a child should be looking for, a time that you can celebrate with them, with your family, and maybe get a little something extra and enjoy it. But like the lead up to it was so dangerous, that the day itself felt so scary and dangerous, that like my body was physically sick on my birthday. And so you can just tell kind of the degree of what I was going through, that yeah, a summer birthday baby had the flu on his birthday, um, a couple of years in a row.
There's a lot of that I can relate to. There's one time I remember we came home from being on a fishing trip with my grandfather, and one of the things that that he always liked to do, because he wanted to be like the Norman Rockwell painting family, right? The patriarch that everybody loves and everybody sings around the campfire kind of thing. And so he made us these milkshakes when we got home from the cabin. And when I was just at the very end of mine, I slurped a little bit. And he took his knuckle and he slammed me on the top of the head so hard, I could felt like the bones shifted in my head and I collapsed to the floor. And, there's that seems to be that just rejection of life, that just rejection of what it means to just be a sloppy, messy human being, right? And sometimes make noises and not always fitting in this very tightly conscribed box. That the only way to live there would be very dehumanizing.
By the time I could read, like reading became this outlet for me. And I one of the first kind of addiction programs I went to was the internet and technology addiction. And so that was the first time that it asked this question of what's the first technology you were addicted to? And it was weird because when I looked back to my life, like I wrote down reading, because as an 8-year old, I would sit on the couch and I'd read for 3 or 4 hours every night, because reading made me quiet. It made me small. It didn't allow me to slurp the last slurp of something. And so it put me out of the way. It brought me to safety. And it was also this thing where I could escape into fantasy. And so the only way that I like survived that home was from 8 years on, finding that way to be quiet and small and in the corner and not seen and not heard. And, mentally, sad to say, but like already mentally as an 8-year old, dissociating from my body into this fantasy place where, you know, medieval fantasy, or the I forget the name. There was this one author, Louis L'Amour books. My grandmother liked Louis L'Amour books, and so I really loved kind of like the settling, kind of the wild, like being in nature and surviving in nature kind of books as well. And so, yeah, it was definitely to look back and just see those effects and how it's like the pattern that it created already at a young age.
So let's move forward just a little bit and tell me about kind of your career as an adult, and what kind of drove you into getting into business and law and all of the things that you did.
What's funny is I really don't talk to people about my career, because the point of my career was to make you adore me, was to have you fawn over me. And there have been a few times where like people, they've known me enough, and then they ask me a little bit about my background, and then I talk about my background, and then immediately I see it's like, oh my gosh, that was so wonderful, or oh, like, wow, you're so smart, or oh, that's like so amazing what you did. And it like all of a sudden, like we go from being in a relationship to them being in a relationship with my degrees and things that I've done. And the whole point that I did those things was exactly, as somebody who's completely unlovable and completely unworthy, everything I did was in this, and also in that sense of needing to be perfect and in the 98th percentile, like everything I did was about needing to show how good I was and needing to get to a place where I could be worthy. And societally, culturally, like degrees and some jobs carry a lot of weight. And so my there's also an interesting artifact too that I've found out is when I look back is we may have these complex trauma proclivities, and then we'll find work that uh, enhances those proclivities. So like a lot of people who are codependent or fawners become, therapists or helpers. And so it's a way for them to continue, they get to be more codependent, or like they get to exercise a skill that they were valued for. And so my first job out of college is I worked for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. I worked uh, in a group that like directly supported, it was Alan Greenspan at the time, who was at, considered to be, equal to or more powerful than Bill Clinton, who was the president. And so I was there because it was this intellectually prestigious institution. It was this culturally prestigious institution. And it was something where like you could kind of like look at the whole of the American economy. But it was also, everybody who was there was also kind of in a similar boat. Of the people my age, it wasn't a question of are you going to get a graduate degree or not. It was which Ivy League institution are you going to get your PhD from? And so there was this huge push for intellectual rigor, but also this intellectual I'm better than you, um, based off of my credentials and who I am and where I am. And I'm getting my value by having this degree or this job where I'm at. And so when I left the Fed, I'd always wanted a business degree. And well, here, so this kind of shows it. I always wanted a business degree, but MBAs aren't looked on as being this intellectually rigorous. Like they're great networkers, and they rise the corporate ladder, but they're not looked at being these intellectual juggernauts. So I couldn't get an MBA. I had to get an MBA and a JD. And literally the only reason I got the JD was so that you would know that I'm smart.
What do you, given some of your childhood stuff, how do you think that impacted the kind of the direction that you went professionally, and what was kind of some of the driving force behind that need to demonstrate or need to feel so accomplished?
Yeah, I'll say two things. So with the MBA JD, I worked for this international law firm in London for a little bit, and then I also worked on Wall Street. And and so it was this need for money and prestige that was really strong. And so there's this dual edge of, having no self-esteem from having it stripped from you, having only been valued, your only value comes from being intellectual, from being the best. And then also there was definitely like I had this chip that I could remember like in my early 20s a lot, just thinking like I'll show them. I'll show them. It was just this head down, running as hard as I could, trying to find the trajectory that would make me um, like safe and respected, so that I could actually finally earn respect and command respect, and not have to deal with what literally like was the entire universe like shitting on me through my childhood. So yeah.
So let's switch a little bit. You told me a bit about your relationship and you were married for a number of years to a woman that had borderline personality disorder. And could you, if you wouldn't mind, just briefly talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you? Because when we chatted before, it struck me on how that almost seemed to be a mirror of some of the things that you had experienced in childhood.
I think the two biggest things I felt through that entire relationship were confusion and pain. And so, she is one of the best friends that anybody can have. Like she's brave, she's bold, she's got great energy. She's able to really connect to people. And in our courtship period, we were good friends, and I got the benefits of that, and I saw like all of these positives. We would finish each other's sentences. She loved the food I cooked. She loved everything about me. There was this kind of like everything was dripping with honey. And for somebody from my background, that honey tasted really good. And the day that we got engaged, the day after we got engaged, I came home, and it was the first time that she kind of like had a real breakdown. And I opened the door, and she was just at the door bawling and in tears and just inconsolable. And it took like a really long, like the first things going through my head, like for her to be at that degree, like my first thought was like, holy shit, there's been a home invasion. She's been violated. The next one was like, okay, we've been robbed. That's the second level. We've been robbed in a lot of stuff. And what had happened is she didn't have to work that day. She broke into my computer. She broke into my email. And then she went through all of my email folders and then found old emails to and about exes. And that had violated her so bad that she was inconsolable and crying. And so like she like forced me to delete, like I had to go through and delete like photos of exes. I had to delete emails from exes. I had to delete all the reminders. And there was a period too, like in this period where she had a very vivid memory. And like I don't even want to say this. Like this is the first time I'm saying this out loud. Is she would like imagine me almost like having like orgies throughout the apartment. And so any furniture that I owned before she came into my life had to go away. Uh, had to be gotten rid of, including like things that I'd owned forever, things that I really loved. Like they had to be destroyed. They had to be taken out of my life because nothing that existed before her could, or nothing that another woman had even looked at could exist in that household. And so this is where kind of like the codependency, enmeshment, self-esteem come in. People hearing this story, a healthy person, this is the time you walk away. We're still not married, and this is happening. This is the time you walk away. But for someone who has so much shame, who's so afraid, who's living in that world of story, who's so afraid of what everybody's going to say about him, who's so afraid of being rejected by his family, who's also has deep attachment wounds and is scared of losing this attachment that was like so amazing, just so amazing. Well, you just do what you can do to try to fix it, to help it, and to make it work, and to kind of plod forward. And so, what's difficult, what you and I talked about before, is like there's a sliding scale, but there's three ways that I tell the story of my marriage. In the story, what I lived through is like it's a story of just kind of being under this constant abuse, like saying I love you the wrong way, or you're beautiful the wrong way, or is the spoon clean? Like those all led to 4 hours of screaming and yelling and her being inconsolable, and nothing I said, my intention, my explanation, nothing I said would change it. It was just that it took like 4 hours for her to kind of wear herself out and then calm down again. But then me taking the brunt of that. And so the person who lived through that marriage grew up in the family he did and didn't have the tools to set boundaries, didn't have the tools to walk away, didn't have the tools to take care of himself. And so just continued to take the brunt of that. And so a different way of telling the story is now like looking back, a healthy person, that relationship would have ended the day after we got engaged.
Yep.
Like that's a good point. That's a good point for a healthy person to draw that line, because what you just did there was violation of me. Like I came in, I was so worried about her having been violated, that because that's how she was treating it. That's how she treated me. Like never when she was upset was this is my trauma and I feel hurt and I don't want to take it out on you. It was like, you did this to me. You're yelling at, like I told her I missed her once, like when she picked me up in the car, like, I miss you. And the first words out of her mouth were, stop yelling at me.
Wow.
And somehow, like, anything could be like confusing. Like it was so dang confusing. And I think growing up, we haven't really used the word narcissism much, but like, and I don't use it with my dad, but when you're in a family where you're gaslit almost every day, you're being hit. This is for your own good, or like your father's a righteous person, or like your physical body is experiencing these things, and the words that are with them, you, for your survival and to be staying with your family, you have to believe the words and not the actions of what are happening. And I think that's one of the core things of here is like, I learned not to trust my own senses, not to trust my own gut, to be disconnected from it, but to be trying to make her okay, trying to make things right, and being really confused of why I'm being accused of. And I didn't have the tools to walk away from it. And also, as like a good codependent, anytime I thought of something that was healthy to do, it's like, oh, a massage would be good. I would get her a massage, hoping that somebody would do the same for me. Like for some reason, like I couldn't do it for myself. Or it's like I would encourage her to hang out with friends because I know hanging out with friends are healthy. But I spent my energy making sure that she would do healthy things and that her health would improve. So there was one person working on her health, and there was no people working on my health in
Let's
that.
That's one of the things that oftentimes happens, right, when we grow up in environments like that, where our sense of self just gets no attention, no validation, no reinforcement. That not only does it seem like we become so oriented around just making sure that other people's needs are met,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
not really even knowing how to address those things on our own. I mean, I can remember, having grown up in an environment where my own sense of self really was just not valued, and just never, I didn't experience a lot of the physical violence. I experienced, shame for wanting attention. And so, my parents just were uninvolved in my life entirely. And if I asked for that, I would be shamed for wanting to like go do something with one of my parents. I would be shamed for wanting that. And so coming into adulthood, there was this sense of like, if you were to ask me, well, how could I be helpful right now? Or what do you want? And I looked inward, there would almost be like this diffuse blind spot where I couldn't even identify what it is that I needed or wanted.
Yeah, you have to like dissociate from your wants like so much that you're just disconnected from them. I have that same kind of diffuse blind spot. If you ask me like, what do you want, Andy? the right answer is like, oh, what do you want?
Right.
I mean, that's the only correct answer to that is like the only way I stay safe was by making sure that I met my family's wants. And then in my partnership, it ended up feeling the same way. I could have acted differently as an adult if I had different tools and my nervous system was wired differently, but it was the same thing. It's like I had to take care of her so that I would be safe,
Safe.
so that I could feel safe. Yeah.
Yep. 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 Well, and that's such an interesting thing, right? I mean, as you talk, even though our upbringings were different in some respects. I mean, there was less kind of active hostility toward me, but much more of the abandonment. But that kind of the lack of development of that core sense of self and the needing to, like, if I achieved this thing, then people would finally see that I'm awesome and I have value. But I remember even when I got, I've got a bachelor's, a master's, and 2 doctorate degrees, and in each one, it just felt completely anticlimactic. It just did not even feel like there was any joy to that, because I think I was hoping for some kind of feeling of like, now I have some value. And when I reached that, I realized that I feel the same as I always did, and was always so oriented around, if I can make you feel better, then somehow you will recognize some value in me. And so I would almost like try to manage my own emotional state by managing the emotional state of others, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's how we were trained, and that's what our nervous system learned. And so, and there's also even there's a weird thing that I think happens. It's so easy for humans to do is there's like we kind of like we're able to split from our pain and project onto others. And the easiest example is like, you made me mad, Todd. It's like I can ignore, like there's this like weird, almost like a beautiful thing that the human body can do. It's like we ventilate, we vent out the pain that I'm feeling by, you're the bad one. You did this, and so it's, I don't know, it's this weird,
Projecting it onto something else.
I think in a weird, like almost a perverse way, it's like it's beautiful because we don't have to experience the pain. But if we're not experiencing the pain, then we're not going to be responsible for our own pain, for our own actions, for our own trauma. And so, one of the parts of healing is like recognizing that when I'm thinking you're horrible and when I'm angry at you, like there's real horrible and angry feelings inside of me. And a lot of that's probably triggered by past injustices or past memories rather than, that last question you asked. I don't know.
So what do you think is, what does codependence mean in your opinion? What is that?
It's interesting. Like, I think codependence and fawning often go a little bit hand in hand. And so fawning is much more limited to the nervous system. And so if we don't have access to fight, flight, or even freeze, we now have to behave in a certain way so that this authority near us may like us or treat us well for our survival. And so fawning kind of turns our nervous system so we're looking outward and we're being pleasing to others. And so that's something that it really goes hand in hand, I feel, with codependence. And I see codependence, it's hard for me now to actually talk about it, I think, the way many people experience it, because some of the ways that I look right now is like codependence is often, there's this niceness to it, a nurturing to it, but it's done from almost like a transactional sense. And no codependent is ever going to really admit this up front unless they're doing the work on themselves. But it's like, I'm going to be nice to you, Todd, so that you're nice to me. But that's different from my innate capacity for kindness. And so, like, I have an innate capacity for kindness, but I also have the right that if, like there's a rule in my system that is be nice. And, I'll be ostracized. I'll be a bad person if I'm not nice. If I'm nice to you, then the rule is you're supposed to be nice to me. But that also like traps me because like I have to like you. I have to like what you're doing to me. Like I don't have the opportunity to not like you. Um, I'm going to jump here for a little bit. One of my favorite things that I give to clients is I call this like non-demand or permission based. And I like looking at somebody, especially when I'm facilitating, and I'll give them the first one it's like, I don't have to like this feeling. I don't have to like how I feel right now. Like we're all trying to accept and be okay and feel good. But to say, I don't have to like this, there's often this release, this relaxation that goes with it. And then the next one I give to them is it's like, now I let them practice this towards me. I don't have to like you. And there's something like, if you listen to those words, I'm not saying I don't like you. I'm not saying I'm going to be mean to you. But by giving me permission not to like you, if you're a dick, I can leave. If you're a dick, I can defend myself. I could set up boundaries. I can yell at you. But so I have this rule system that's been like punished into me and built into me. I have to be nice to everyone. I have to like everyone. And there's a horrible thing with that because then that makes me suffer at the whim of your emotions, your trauma, your manipulations. Because if I have to like you, I also have to get you to like me. And so you can use guilt, obligation, manipulation. You can throw your trauma at me unwittingly, and I have to respond to you in a positive way and take care of you to make sure that I'm still showing you that I like you and then trying to get that other end of that transaction that you like me.
Where does
And
that
so it really
where does that sense of imperative come from, do you think? That keeps people stuck in a pattern where they feel like they don't have permission to set a boundary or just dislike somebody. What keeps people trapped in that, do you think?
I'm gonna answer that from a little broader. I see a lot of complex trauma. The human mammal has the longest period of dependency of any mammal species. And I worked on a farm for a while and it was amazing. A horse would be born and then it's standing on its feet and it's galloping around. Like a human baby is so developmentally far behind than any other mammal. And so we have this like long period of our life where we're living as dependents to adults, to a system that's taking care of us. And so inside that system, we learn how to live and how to react. And now in a healthy family, like a healthy family is going to slowly teach you agency. They're going to slowly encourage your maturation, your individuation.
Give you a sense of value.
Give you a sense of value, like value you so that you can value yourself learn how to value yourself from the inside. But in unhealthy systems and in unhealthy family dynamics, that's, if your father is having a tantrum and going to his 3-year-old self every other day, like you're not having that healthy role model, you're not having that healthy system. And when he's having a tantrum, he's demanding. He's demanding. So I call my work non-demand for a purpose because my entire life was demanding. I was demanded to be a certain way. And if those demands weren't met, I was either thrown into my room, or I was hit, or I was punished, grounded in some other way. And so while we're dependents, this can happen outside of a dependency period, but like largely while we're dependent on others, we learn uh, how to survive in an environment and what the rules are of that environment. And the rules of my environment were, I take care of your nervous system so that I can have food. I take care of your nervous system so that I can sleep. And if I take care of your nervous system, then you will be not yelling at me, which is the closest thing I got to kindness from my father. And so it's like you learn inside this system through patterns of interaction, and also the pain of potential abandonment or loss, um, to respond in a certain way.
The word that you used, demand, really caught my attention, because that really feels like there's something there, right? That is at the root of this whole pattern of codependence, and what keeps us stuck there is this sense that other people, we learn from a very young age that there is a demand that we serve the needs for others. And the thing about that demand is that it's unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it can come out of nowhere. You take a bite of food and your fork hits the top of your mouth, and all of a sudden or hits your teeth, and all of a sudden there's this emotional unraveling, with your father, that suddenly now you have to attend to, or with your previous wife, where it's like even the smallest thing, suddenly there is this, you have to, it is your fault that I'm feeling this way, and you're the one who has to take care of me. And no one is ever taking care of you. You never get any nurturance or support or any of that in the process. It seems like that demand piece is such a kind of a core component. That feeling of that demand piece is such a core component of that whole codependent system, where the dysregulation, the kind of the spontaneous and unpredictable dysregulation in another person suddenly becomes our responsibility and our fault. And then we are the ones who have to then attend to and try to manage the needs of that other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And there's also it's created not just in that family relationship and individual relationship, but in our society as well. Like I can remember, the last day of school, we get to go to a park to play as kids, and I remember being in second or third grade, and we're all lined up outside, and the teachers are telling us, we have to leave the park cleaner than when we came. And so there's this, we're being made responsible for, there's other adults, there's families, but all of a sudden us 7-year-olds, like we might get yelled at if the park is dirty when we leave. We might get punished if the park is dirty when we leave. We all of a sudden we're made responsible for society. And but then we've already had that training of, you need to be a good little boy or a girl. And so we know what, there's a system of punishment and authority, and you know what happens to good little boys, and you know what happens to bad little boys and girls.
How do you see codependence showing up in relationships, and why is it such a toxic thing, do you think?
Mm. When we first started talking, I talked about like the nurturing, like, in my own relationship, I was trying to help, and I thought I was being loving by trying to help, and by trying to change her and trying to make her better. And so there's a dual layer of it of, my definition of love right now is being with what is. And so if you're angry at me, that's what's true right now. And so if I'm a healthy, individuated adult, I can regulate my nervous system and I can be okay with your anger. Maybe we could talk about it and we could find out that it's, I did something that really pissed you off, or it's your past trauma. Like I could be in a different space with you. And so there's this one side of it where there's this kind of like fear or control that's dressed up as nurturing. And so, if you just acted a little bit different, Todd, you'd be so great. If you just learned this, Todd, you'd be so great, Todd. If you just like I can give you this like, Todd, you are so wonderful. You have all of these degrees. But if you could just do this, like then, then our relationship would be good. And so like I can give you that. It sounds nurturing and it kind of sounds with the words, but like I'm not accepting you for who you are and taking responsibility for myself and allowing you to take responsibility for you. And there's another piece in this one. It really hurt when I saw it and when I saw it in me. And it is that transactional piece of, the other word, the word that really hurts is entitlement. There's this hidden entitlement that the codependents don't see. It's like, well, I'm showing up on your podcast. Now you have to show up on mine. Or I'm being nice to you. Now you have to be nice to me. I gave her a back massage. Why doesn't she ever give me back massages? Like we give to other people that which we want, but without necessarily being aware of their own love language or what they actually want or how they want to be loved. And then we maybe expect, we may not, a lot of times we don't even say it explicitly, but I've been giving you so many back massages. Why don't you give me a back massage? Or like I've cleaned all the dishes for the last week. Why didn't you clean them? We don't use our words to say, I'd really love it if you cleaned the dishes, or we're finding out how somebody else wants to be loved. And so there's this bit of this transactional piece which makes it entitled, because now I'm sitting like I deserve a back rub because I've given you 6 back rubs. I deserve you cleaning the dishes because I've cleaned the dishes for the last week. And so there's like a really, yeah.
That's interesting. One of my mantras is that expectations are premeditated resentments, right? And this kind of shows up in that way, right? Because it's like the impulse. What you're really describing is that we can have 2 different impulses to do something kind. One comes from truly a place of generosity and doing something just purely out of the spirit of being helpful and being supported or supportive. And the other one really manifests out of this need that we have that we don't necessarily know how to identify or articulate, where it's like, man, I need to be nurtured, but I don't know how to communicate. I want to feel like I belong, but I don't know how to communicate. I want you to be my friend, but I don't know how to really identify or articulate that. So instead, what I'll do is just spontaneously do things for you in order to make your life better, in order to, make you feel better, in the hopes that somehow you will reciprocate that so that I can get some of my own needs met.
Yeah. I think you really articulated it clearly. There's a bit of that broken mirror where I have the capacity to do all of these things, but maybe it's too selfish. I've been taught that it's selfish, or I've been taught that it's prideful, or I haven't ever been treated that I'm worthy of doing those things for me. And so I forget, you just worded it, but it's like, I'm doing these things for you, often the way I want them done for me, rather than just being able to do them for me, or to ask for what I want for me and to ask you what you want for you.
So how do people get if somebody sees some of these things in themselves, right? I mean, what's the kind of the first step in getting out of that trap? Because having been stuck in that trap, many years ago, and I mean, I look at so many instances throughout my life where I would like go in and I'd try to rescue, or I'd like do nice things for people that they didn't even ask me to do. Right. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, they're kind of like, what, almost like, dude, why are you even doing this? Right. And being in relationships where, where I never felt like I was lovable or, experienced being valued. So I was always giving of myself almost to the point of self-harm. What is something that people can do if they start to recognize that pattern in themselves? Start to break out of that a bit.
You've asked the $1 million question, Todd. I think it's that place even of beginning to recognize it, because so much, a lot of like how we live our life is this. There's a saying that I used to love. It, people would be like, "Do fish know they're swimming in water?" And when we're living in our personality, when we're living out of the way that we were trained or that our nervous system learned how to respond, like we're swimming in this water that we're not even like, we can't even see it. And also when like so much of our society and culture is swimming in the same water, like we can't even see it. It's so invisible to us that the easiest sign is, why does my relationship feel confusing and painful? And then there's various degrees of like, why isn't this working? Why am I not getting these massages? And so that confusion and pain is often the first sign. And unfortunately, sometimes that confusion and pain has to grow to a really high level or to a breaking point before people can finally start to look and to do the things to work with and change themselves. Because how you get out of it is you find healthy people. But what we think is healthy, what I thought was healthy at 18 is the opposite of what I think is healthy today. And so I looked for what I thought were healthy people, and those are people that just kept reinforcing the belief system that I had. And so I'm not going to answer this probably the right way, but unfortunately, like there's a period of this pain and confusion and then searching. Like searching. So the first step that you do is you start to search. And then you start to learn about words like codependence or fawning. And then you start to read books about codependence or fawning. And then maybe you find, like when I went through Tim's Lift program, I went through Codependence Anonymous at the same time. And so it's a 12-step program that's based off of kind of the practices that AA have practiced and developed, but translated a little bit for codependence. And so much of the value is the co-regulation we get from others, but also the inputs that we're getting from others. And so finding healthy people is one of the most important things that we can do. And so we have to do the search to start to know what healthy looks like and what healthy people begin to look like. Personally, I think you can do a lot. I'm sorry, my facial expression, if people are listening, they won't see my facial expression. I was going to say you could do a lot with a therapist or a coach, but like the reality is, I think like or on your own, even you can do a lot with that. But the reality is that it's really helpful to find a group where there's a group that's walking on this path to understanding themselves in a new way, understanding systems in a new way, and communicating in a new way. I'm gonna detour for a second. I don't even remember what it was, but there was a moment like I was home 2 years ago, and my like I was talking with my mom, and my father walked into the room. Like he plays this radio, and when he plays his radio, nobody else can speak. And so his morning routine is he starts in the bathroom, shaving and brushing his teeth, listening to the radio. But then he comes to the kitchen. Well, so I'm in the kitchen talking with mom. Dad comes in the kitchen with his radio. We're no longer allowed to talk. Like he's like, and mom, my mother is a beautiful, wonderful, extreme codependent. And so she believes that. And so but like after being in Codependence Anonymous after 8 minutes I said something about like, I am equal to you and you are equal to me. You are not above me, and I'm not below you and I'm not above you. And it's like the seventh tradition or something from Codependence Anonymous. I'd been saying it almost daily at that point. And so I did not quote it right there. It's been a couple of years, but like there's a point where this language came out of me where I could stand up for myself, but I could also like recognize because like old Andy, he would have felt like shit. And he like I even now I cringe inside thinking about that. But with that support, with learning these new system and with learning a new healthy system, I was able to recognize that this was an unhealthy interaction. It was an unhealthy environment. I was able to speak up for myself and I was able to create a boundary to leave there because that's their system and they're not going to change it. And so there's a lot of, yeah.
Yeah. Two things kind of came up. One of the things that seems to be really difficult when we kind of engage in that codependency, right, is that the differentiation between our side of the street and their side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really hard to just allow them to have their experience without feeling the need to try to manage that in some way, and just allow them to have their tantrum, allow them to say whatever they're going to say without internalizing that. And that at least for me was something that I had to very much just intentionally tell myself and just repeat that, you know what, your reaction is on you. What I do is on me. And it is not up to me to try to manage your emotions for you or try to save you from your distress and experience. It used to feel that way, but I'm just going to make a decision that I am just not going to go there, even though there may be a piece inside there that is just like, but, and just so wants to just jump into that old pattern and just being, just intentionally visualizing there being two sides of a street. You're standing on one, they're standing on the other, and not feeling like you have to race over to their side to help them clean up their mess.
Mm-hmm. I think, what you're saying was probably one of the key pieces to begin to mentally and emotionally start to separate that out of, you use the language of like, what side of the street is it? I love the language that Byron Katie uses. Whose business is it? There's only 3 types of business in the world: your business, my business, and everything else is realities or God's business. And so to really separate that out. And then there's a second piece to that. And, you may be acting in a horrendous way. If something is alive inside of me that I'm responding to it, that compulsion that I feel, that's my business. That's my side of the street. And that, we do that splitting and the projecting. It's easy for me to point the finger, but to recognize what is this that's alive inside of me, that gives me the path forward of what I have to work with. If it's, my prior abandonment wounds or rejection wounds or feeling that I'm in danger if I don't help you. And so taking that kind of like creating that emotional separation, to have that emotional boundary of this is you and this is me, and recognizing in relationships, we both may be having something happening at the same time. But to be able to then pull back, and so that those that pent up, that energy that's compelling me forward, that's something that's alive inside of me, and that's the place where I have to start to focus, and I have to start
Well, and
to do
what's
my work.
and doing that is so important in relationships, right? Because
Hmm.
one of the critical things whenever you're in a relationship is the ability to be present with your partner when they're experiencing some kind of distress, and just be,
Hmm.
be a partner, a support person who can be there and just be present and listen, explore, and be helpful. And when our own emotions suddenly race over to their side of the street and we become tied to their distress, then we can no longer show up as a kind of an engaged and present partner, because now we're kind of like
Hmm.
tied into their
Hmm.
distress. And now it's like, well, now we can't be helpful, right? We
Hmm.
find ourselves in this kind of rescue mode rather than being in a supportive mode.
Yeah, yeah. And so learning how to regulate your own body, your own nervous system, your own emotions is such an important piece of this too. And it's one of those things where, a lot of people, like, they want a quick fix, but these are, it's a day of one step forward, sometimes a couple of steps back, like finding the tools that will help you regulate. So for me, I actually I think somatic, I did a lot of somatic work, and I still do a lot of somatic work on my healing journey. And I see somatic work as kind of having two main, for me, it's got two main agendas. One is to come back into my own body. And so here, this is, you're talking about, like, we get intertwined. So to be able to come back into my own body, but also, even when I'm not with you, to be more alive and more experienced, more embodied in myself and in the present. And the second prong of that is so important is it's somatic tracking, which is to be able to be curious and safe in your body, because there's a good reason why we're often projecting or not in our own body, and it's because it's this, like, mush of really uncomfortable feelings that we don't want to feel. And so when we start to feel those feelings, when we start to reconnect with ourselves, now all of a sudden our life gets a lot worse, because we're feeling all of these things that we've been avoiding for so long. And so to have some tools to start to change how you relate to uncomfortable emotions and uncomfortable feelings as well. And somatic tracking, I really like it. It's a practice. It originally developed for chronic pain, but I use it with people for emotional pain as well. It's like a very simple way to just develop this, like, curiosity and safety for the different energies that are flowing through your body. Um,
Well, and connecting with the body is so critical, right? Because particularly if we grew up in an environment where we didn't feel safe, or our own sense of self didn't develop very well, one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to go into a state of dissociation, right? And that somatic work is so like you said, is just so important, because it kind of grounds us again in our own experience, grounds us in our own body, and helps to keep us from kind of going somewhere else during times of distress. And it makes it easier just to remain present. And what are like, to the people who have never heard of somatic work or any of that, can you give me just
mm,
kind of just a simple example of what that is?
yeah, it's really simple. So Peter Levine is the founder of somatic experiencing, and a lot of the tools that I use have come from him. And one is, like, there's a very simple one, but it's even so, when we feel shame, you can look at shame as being maybe part of the nervous system, the collapse part. And so, like, with shame or hopelessness or depression, there's this collapse feeling. And so one of the simple things that I love that he does, even, it's just like kind of feeling your spine. There's like two versions of this, but like the simplest one is you just like feel your spine, like you strengthen and lengthen your spine, maybe lift your chin a little bit and then raise your eyes a little bit. And that, like, you can, there's a sense, I don't like the words fake it till you make it, but there is a sense of like, we can communicate with our nervous system, we can communicate and influence our body. And so when you even just change your posture like that, you notice it and change your posture like that, that can change how you feel and how you relate to people and to the world.
Andy, in this last few minutes, and we're kind of running short on time, I just want to open it up and, just let you share whatever kind of closing points or whatever you would like to include in our conversation here.
Becoming hurt happened through connection with others, and healing happens in connection with others as well. And so finding a healing space, whether it's a 12-step group or some other program, is so valuable. And to have, or even a therapist or a coach, like somebody who can be regulated and can help co-regulate as you walk through your own belief system and your own emotions. I think too, one of the points that was so valuable for me was that the emotional boundaries piece, your side of the road, my side of the road, just recognizing, that in a relationship, both people are probably feeling things, and then both people, like, it's to separate out and realize that churn in your belly is your responsibility, that's something that's alive inside of you to work with and to heal. And I think third is just that hopefully there's maybe some tools, whether it's like parts work or somatic experiencing, like both of those are extremely valuable for anybody who's looking to heal themselves. And finally is there's something like, I lived a life that was always running, striving. It was kind of like being this empty shell. Like I was an empty shell of a human being for most of my life due to my own self-esteem and my own belief systems. And you can feel excitement when you do that. There's a lot of excitement when you're in your sympathetic nervous system, but there's also, a lot of anxiety and depression, and disconnection as well. And, so for me, like really like slowing down, finding my body, being connected in this space, and really like starting to learn how to connect to other people has been so valuable. And it just, there are palettes in this life that I didn't know existed. And it's really beautiful to be able to experience the present moment and be connected with myself. And I'll share too, I still have constant tension headaches. I still have pain all the time. My life is like a shitter a lot of the point, but now like I have the tools to respond to it. I have connections to support me or to be with or to co-regulate with. And then I just also have this different attitude and a different relationship with myself that I can connect with people in another way. And it's a much more beautiful experience. It unlocks a lot of the beauty that I was unable to see and experience in the earlier part of my life.
That's awesome. And your point about if you've experienced trauma and you're struggling with some of this stuff, it's not like you just get over it and it goes away in the same way that you get over the flu, right? And the difference is that now, through healing, you develop some new skills for navigating through some of these, so that when stuff comes up, it doesn't kind of derail your life in the way that it used to. And so that's thank you very much for all of that, Andy. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to another conversation in the future. This has been really wonderful.
Yeah. I'd be able to talk with you for several more hours, Todd. This has been great.
Thank you so much.